faithfully delivering value and interpreting global bestsellers. Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today, the book we're interpreting for you is Science Communication in the Victorian Era. Science communication is essentially spreading scientific knowledge to the public, helping everyone understand scientific principles and tech advancements. To put it simply, it's science popularization. Interpreting tech-related books on Sally's Book Talk can also be seen as doing science communication work. The book we're diving into today focuses on Britain's Victorian era, telling the story of how science communication evolved during that time. The Victorian era was Queen Victoria's reign in Britain, starting from her accession in 1837 and ending with her death in 1901. Over more than 60 years, Britain's technology, economy, and military power boomed, making it the world's top superpower back then. The reason we're covering the Victorian era is that before this, science popularization activities were pretty rare. Back then, the audience for scientific writings was tiny. Only the wealthy could afford pricey books, and even fewer of them cared about science. Oh, it's so why?
But in the Victorian era, publication costs dropped a lot, and people's incomes rose, laying the groundwork for science popularization to take off.
The subtitle of this book is Designing Nature for New Audiences. Here, new audiences means the flood of emerging readers from that era.
We'll dig deeper into this in the upcoming interpretation.
And the word design here refers to Victorian science communicators exploring and experimenting with methods, forms, and content for popularizing science. Plus, Victorian society was totally hooked on science. It was a golden age of discovery. Global trade was buzzing, people opened up to new ideas, and daily life was full of cool tech and novelties. Especially the 1851 Great Exhibition in London, with its wild array of new tech and gadgets, fired up the public's curiosity for science. As the book's author, Bernard Lightman, notes, science became an inseparable part of Victorian culture. Lightman is a history of science professor at York University in Canada and a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada. To research the history of science communication in the Victorian era, he spent 13 full years gathering extensive materials, ultimately producing this monumental work. The Chinese edition of this book spans over 600 pages with 470,000 words, covering major areas such as science, religion, literature, and publishing. Now, internationally renowned academic journals.
The journal Science once commented that to understand the stories behind thousands of popular science books, this work is essential reading.
This interpretation will distill three main aspects from this monumental work. First, we'll explore why science communication flourished during the Victorian era. Next, we'll highlight several representative science popularizers, and finally discuss the impact of Victorian science communication both then and for future generations. All right, let's follow the author into the world of Victorian science popularization. First, during the Victorian era, science communication was able to rise rapidly. This was due to three factors: favorable timing, advantageous conditions, and public support. The first factor is timing. By timing, we mean the major trends of the era's development. Since it's science communication, you need actual science to communicate, right? And the Victorian era was precisely a period of explosive growth in science and technology. Countless innovations emerged, like Lord Kelvin's breakthroughs in electromagnetism that advanced communication technology. Thus, in 1851, the first undersea cable was successfully laid across the English Channel. By the 1870s, such cables spanned the globe, while new instruments expanded humanity's cosmic exploration. British astronomer William Huggins used astronomical spectroscopes to analyze distant celestial bodies. Additionally, Britain served as the global shipping hub, transporting vast quantities of plants, animals, and specimens to London via maritime networks. Some of these precious specimens became research subjects for scientists. Others went to the London Zoo or British Museum for public display, allowing Londoners easy access to exotic creatures from South American rainforests, or African savannas. Thus, natural history became a highly popular discipline at that time. And among all scientific achievements, the most brilliant was undoubtedly Darwin's theory of evolution, presented in his 1859 work, On the Origin of Species. The emergence of evolutionary theory drastically changed people's understanding of religion, life, and even the workings of the world, causing significant social impact. So these new theories and discoveries sparked public curiosity, creating fertile ground for science communication to flourish. The second aspect is geographical advantage, or what we'd call industry factors. This industry was publishing where 19th century innovations like rotary printing, typecasting, and typesetting emerged. These technologies slashed publication costs, boosting book demand and making publishing a profitable business. By mid-19th century, brilliant publishers fueled explosive growth in popular science books. Companies like Macmillan, Longman, and Cassell became industry leaders. These publishers sought top authors and paired them with skilled illustrators to create outstanding science works. Plus, they handled marketing and promotional campaigns. Thanks to publishing advances, science book annual output quadrupled by the 1840s to 50s compared to early century. By late Victorian era, quality science books routinely sold tens of thousands of copies. The third aspect is human factors, mainly readers and authors. First, readers, the demand side. From mid-19th century, industrialization created more working class and urban middle class folks who, after securing basic needs, pursued cultural enrichment. Plus, education expansion stood UK adult literacy to nearly 60%. This surge of literate people with disposable income unleashed the book market's potential. On the flip side, the supply of science writers also boomed, meaning more science writers emerged, since readers multiplied and books sold well. By the 1860s, writing had become a decently paid profession. In 1871, UK writers quintupled since century's start. Same in science writing. Making a living through science writing became common. For example, the book mentions an excellent science writer named Wood. In good years, his annual net income reached £450, equivalent to about 300,000 renminbi in purchasing power today. Of course, some writers pursued science communication for reasons beyond money. We'll cover this in part 2. In short, the Victorian era saw rapid technological and economic growth, sparking widespread interest in scientific knowledge. Meanwhile, publishing industry growth and an influx of science communicators combined to fuel science communication's rapid expansion. So, against this backdrop, who were these science communicators? Why did they start science writing? And what were they like? And what kind of works did they produce? With these questions, the author meticulously traced the lives of over 30 key science writers. We'll explore these answers in the upcoming part 2. Victorian science communicators mainly fell into 3 categories: professional writers, scientists, and church ministers. First, professional writers, those making a living through science communication. A notable example is Richard Proctor. Proctor's entry into this field is quite poignant. He studied law at university but always loved astronomy.
He self-published a book about Saturn for this passion.
It even earned praise in astronomy circles. He also built a small telescope, hoping to spark his son's interest in astronomy. But tragically, his son died young. When it rains, it pours in 1866. Proctor suffered an investment failure, saddling him with £13,000 of debt. Forced by circumstances, 30-year-old Proctor quit astronomy research and turned to science writing. At first, his books didn't sell well, until he wrote Half Hours with the Telescope. It went through 20 editions, becoming his breakthrough work. Proctor had a strength. He welcomed feedback, especially from publishers. Early on, he packed his books with complex calculations and detailed charts, thinking this made them more professional. But the publishers said that few people would care about formulas and charts. After that, Proctor decided to change his style, focusing on explaining complex astronomy topics in simple terms for readers. From then on, Proctor's situation improved. He no longer worried about selling his works. In his career, he wrote over 60 books, likely making him the most prolific science popularizer of the 19th century. So much so that in 1875, the New York Times joked that Mr. Proctor published books too fast. Small and medium libraries couldn't hold them all within a year or two. And, his most successful work is called Worlds Beyond the Earth. This book was published until 1909 with at least 29 editions. Royalties, book sales shares, and paid speaking gigs quickly earned Proctor a solid income. Now, in his own words, he easily earned £5,000 yearly, equivalent to several million RMB today. Among professional science writers, one group deserves special attention: female science writers. In the 19th century, science was still male-dominated. Attitudes were very conservative back then, believing women weren't qualified for science. However, in the latter half of the 19th century, many women didn't back down from these prejudices. They joined science as illustrators, research assistants, and more. Becoming science writers was one relatively easy way for women to participate. A representative figure is Margaret Gatty. Gatty's father was a linguist, and she received good home education from a young age. But Gatty had poor health with bronchitis, so she moved to the seaside for recovery. During her recovery out of boredom, she started reading marine biology books to pass the time and quickly got hooked on marine biology, which became her lifelong passion. That it was also because of her illness that she had plenty of time to learn about it and soon began her science writing career. Female writers had their own strengths. Their writing style was more child-friendly and also great for family reading. Gatty's first book was called British Seaweeds, which shared many little stories packed with education and science facts. Soon, Gatty became a household name in Britain as a science writer. His masterpiece is called Parables from Nature. This book combines science, morality, religion, and more, making it perfect for Victorian families to read on Sundays. It remained a bestseller, continuously reprinted, published until 1950. While professional writers make science accessible, their work may lack scientific rigor, sparking a long debate about who's qualified to popularize science, still unresolved today. Well, this second parameter was A. Among all authors, scientists are undoubtedly the most authoritative. But many scientists need a mindset shift when starting science communication. The prime example is Thomas Huxley, one of Britain's most famous biologists. Known for staunchly defending Darwin's theory of evolution, Huxley was deeply committed to research in his youth, eager to elevate his academic standing. He published his first scientific paper at age 20. At 21, Huxley sailed with the British Navy to the Southern Hemisphere to study marine invertebrates. But similarly, due to financial hardship, he accepted invitations from newspapers and magazines. He occasionally wrote science articles for extra cash, for example. The Westminster Review offered him £12 per 16-page article, a windfall then. Even so, Huxley tried to maintain dignity, hoping readers would distinguish him from other writers. He often worried this writing might damage his scientific reputation, but his attitude gradually changed after a promotion. In 1870, Huxley achieved significant scientific success and was appointed president of the British Association for the Advancement of Science. In this role, Huxley needed a broader perspective on science communication. Now, he realized national scientific progress couldn't rely solely on scientists. The public must actively participate. Huxley then decided to devote more time to science education. He even declared his scientific ambitions had taken a back seat. He once gave a series of lectures to the working class, introducing On the Origin of Species. These were later compiled into a pamphlet. And after reading it, Darwin lamented, "What's the point of me writing such a thick book?" This unassuming little green book has already explained everything crystal clear.
Additionally, Huxley's science communication works include Introduction to the Science Primer Series, Physical Geography, etc.,
all best-selling popular science books. Among them, Introduction to the Science Primer series sold 19,000 copies within just 4 months of publication. Huxley didn't just write himself, he also widely mobilized his scientist friends. For example, he participated in the International Scientific Series. He planned and published the British part. This series was written by world-class scientists with the goal of having top scholars explain their theories to the public. As one of the leaders, Huxley exercised editorial rights, attracting many scholars with reputation guarantees and high royalties. This included physicists like Tyndall and philosophers like Spencer, among others. In this series alone, Tyndall's Forms of Water sold over 14,000 copies. In Huxley's career, he went from early disdain for science communication to later becoming a flag bearer for promoting it. It was precisely because he realized the enormous benefits of science communication for scientific development and made great contributions. Some hailed Huxley as the greatest science communicator of the Victorian era, besides professional writers and scientists. In the Victorian era, there was another group involved in science communication that shouldn't be underestimated: the church ministers. And the constant emergence of new technologies, especially new knowledge like Darwin's On the Origin of Species and evolution theory, greatly shook the foundations of religious faith at the time. All Romans are facing of higher rates, and that comes with the question of disappearance. Regarding these new ideas, two voices emerged within the church. Some opposed, some supported. Regardless of their stance, ministers from the church began entering the field of science communication, but their content was mixed with a lot of religious theories. In modern terms, they were smuggling in personal agendas. Some church members were firmly opposed to evolution theory. In spreading knowledge, they focused on natural history or astronomy, aiming to evoke public reverence for God. A representative figure among them was Francis Morris. Morris is a prolific writer who has published over 20 natural history works. After graduating from Worcester College, Oxford, he has been working in the church. Until 1845, he wrote British Birds, which brought him fame. In Morris's books, while introducing the habits, distributions, and other natural history anecdotes of organisms, he also incorporates praises to God. He wrote in his book that whenever he sees the masterpieces of the Creator, whether it's a brilliant sunset, the sea, a tree, a mountain, or a flower, admiration naturally arises. Morris is also a staunch opponent of evolution theory. He once corresponded with Huxley and mocked that Huxley should go to a good university to catch up. In Morris's works, he deliberately undermines the credibility of evolution theory. For example, in his book titled Notes on Animal Intelligence and Character, he uses numerous anecdotes to prove that animals like dogs and cows have thinking abilities, thus illustrating that God endowed animals with souls, to refute Darwin's theory and other materialist ideas. However, this book sold poorly, with only 350 copies sold after 1 year of publication. There are also people in the church who have an open mind towards new knowledge, represented by Charles Kingsley, who is a pastor, novelist, and science writer. After the publication of On the Origin of Species, Kingsley had great reverence for Darwin himself, and he often wrote letters to Darwin to share his thoughts and experiences. Darwin also valued this pastor friend highly. In the early 1860s, Kingsley also became friends with several of Darwin's main supporters. Kingsley always tried to integrate scientific knowledge like evolution theory into religious explanations. He believed that church ministers should not be complacent, but should explore natural theology that is compatible with both the Bible and science. He believed that both science and the Bible confirm the existence of natural laws. In Kingsley's books, he separates the how and the why. In his view, science studies the how, that is, the operating laws of things. But the existence of God provides a deeper reason for the operation of scientific laws, that is, to answer the why question. And so, for example, when describing a canyon, Kingsley first describes how water, earthquakes, and glaciers reshape the landscape. These are the how parts. And after that, he guides readers to think about the reasons for these phenomena, proposing that all things are combined according to divine and wondrous rules. Only God can achieve this. In short, whether supporting new ideas or not, pastor authors in the church did play a role in spreading knowledge. Um, from professional writers to scientists and church pastors, talents from various fields converged in science communication and made their own contributions. Thanks to these contributors, Victorian science communication had a series of impacts on society then and later. Well, in part 3, let's discuss these impacts. First, during this period, science communication sparked discussions about the relationship between science and popularization, making more scientists value their outreach work. Indeed, a group of Victorian scientists dedicated themselves to science popularization. The aforementioned Huxley is the most typical example. Huxley firmly believed that scientists should be the ones doing science communication. In 1887, Huxley declared that letting non-scientist writers cover science would harm the public. Take Robert Ball, Cambridge Observatory director. He often volunteered astronomy talks for youth, but despite recognizing science communication's value, scientists had reservations about diving in. Scholars doing science writing were often seen as neglecting their duties, and beyond extra income, it seemed to offer little professional benefit. As Ball noted, some stigmatized him for being a public speaker. In Victorian scientific circles, you couldn't have your cake and eat it too. But this period, at least, opened the door for scientists doing outreach, and by the 20th century, things improved significantly. Outstanding scientists could earn peers' respect while engaging in science communication. Today, more renowned scholars devote significant effort to writing for the public or explaining science to audiences. Sally's book talk has covered many great science works by scientists, like Hawking's A Brief History of Time and Carl Sagan's Cosmos. Which scientists' books have you read? Share your favorite science books in the comments below. Victorian science communication also spurred innovative outreach formats and boosted related industries like museums. The popular science book market in the Victorian era was fiercely competitive. To attract readers, science writers didn't just polish their prose, they also added tons of illustrations to their works. As they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Improved engraving and photography techniques flooded books with vibrant images. Some authors got creative, adding clever twists to their illustrations. For example, The Life of Insects featured outline-only insect drawings. Readers colored them based on text descriptions. This coloring trick is common in modern science books, but back then, it was a novel crowd pleaser. Beyond books, science communication took many other forms. Experts pulled out all the stops to capture attention. Some performers dazzled audiences with science magic using spectroscopes and lenses. Institutions like museums also innovated their science outreach. In 1854, London's Crystal Palace displayed life-sized dinosaur statues, making book illustrations leap into 3D reality. The Polytechnic Museum showcased industrial progress with a 3-ton diving apparatus for paid public experiences. This exhibit proved wildly popular, earning the museum an extra £1,000 yearly. Ultimately, Victorian science communication's greatest impact was embedding ideas like evolution into public consciousness. Darwin's Origin of Species was actually quite dense for general readers, but science writers decoded and spread its revolutionary ideas far and wide. As one critic noted, if Darwin had one reader, Huxley likely had a dozen. When Victorians discussed science, they often referenced accessible writers. This dissemination truly transformed how generations view our world. In the early 19th century, faith-based thinking was mainstream, with all social order relying on religious frameworks. By the late 19th century, British societal thought had undergone massive changes. For the emerging middle and working classes, the old set of values had become outdated. Science-based thinking offered them a whole new way to view the world. Faith in science inspired many Victorians. Huxley once declared that scientific progress provided a foundation for a new morality. Today, facing a complex world, mainstream society still firmly believes science can solve problems and help us overcome challenges. This societal trust in science stems from generations of science communicators' dedication and contributions. Well, that's science communication in the Victorian era. That's our interpretation of this book. Reading notes are below the audio. See you next time.